saucer crash site is allegedly 175 miles northwest of Roswell in an area of New Mexico known as the San Augustine Plains. The contention that a flying saucer crashed at this location and was recovered by the U.S. military is supported by three principal testimonies, two second-hand and one first-hand. The second-hand accounts. These accounts were related by Mr. Vern Maltese and Miss Alice Knight, who were acquainted with the alleged original eyewitness, Mr. Grady L. Barnett, who is deceased. Unless otherwise noted, the following statements appeared on footage used to prepare a video, Recollections of Roswell Part 2, by the Fund for UFO Research. See Appendix C. Alice Knight. I don't recall the date. I don't remember whether it was before my husband and I were married or after. I don't recall the date. But he, the eyewitness, saw a UFO fall, and he got nearly to the site. But they got nearly up to the UFO, but it was close enough that you could see some creatures. He said they didn't look like human beings out there, and along came government cars and trucks. I guess it was government. You know, it was a long time ago. And they told him to go on back and forget that they ever saw anything, and that's all I recall. Assessment. This brief testimony suggests that the witness did not know the date of this event. It also appears that the creatures were seen from a distance as evidenced by the statement, they got nearly up to the UFO, but it was close enough that you could see some creatures. The testimony also seems consistent with a description of anthropomorphic dummies, as the witness stated they didn't look like human beings. Vern Maltese. Their heads were hairless, no eyebrows, no eyelashes, no hair. This second-hand witness alleged that the eyewitness told him he observed beams from a flying saucer that had burst open that were about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, very slim. Their heads were hairless with no eyebrows, no eyelashes, no hair, with sort of a pear-shaped head. He also related that the beings were not exactly like human beings, similar but not exactly. He described that the hands of the beings were not covered and they only had 4 fingers. He also related that the clothing of the beings was one piece and gray in color. The witness concluded that as they, the witnesses, were just starting to look things over really closely, the military moved in and gave them a briefing to not say anything about it. Assessment. This description of events also indicates that the eyewitness apparently did not closely examine the scene and was just starting to look things over when the military arrived. As with previous testimony, from a distance the dummies were likely to look, as described by the witness, not exactly like humans, similar but not exactly. The description of the flying saucer that had burst open is a likely description of the dummy suspension rack that was open on the sides. See figures 74, 75, and 76. The detailed descriptions of the beings as about 3.5 to 4 feet tall, very slim in stature, their heads were hairless, with no eyebrows, no eyelashes, no hair, with hands that were not covered, and action of an Alderson Research Laboratories model anthropomorphic dummy. The head of the Alderson dummy was bald, and the area of the eyebrows protruded but had no hair. See figure 72. Also, a distinguishing feature of the Alderson dummy, unlike the Sierra dummy, was that it had individual fingers not covered by gloves that were often damaged during the tests, resulting in the loss of fingers. See figures 35, 73, 75. Due to the second-hand nature of these accounts, even UFO theorists were not convinced that this incident actually occurred. Corroborating testimony of a first-hand witness was necessary to verify these claims. The first-hand testimony is examined next. The first-hand account. This testimony became part of the Roswell incident in 1990, following an episode of the television program Unsolved Mysteries. Following a dramatized recreation of the program, persons with information concerning this event were encouraged to call a special toll-free telephone number. From the outset, some UFO theorists were skeptical of this testimony due to the amount of detail provided from the witness, who was only 5 years old in 1947. In fact, UFO organizations sponsored a conference in February 1992 to evaluate the testimony for authenticity. The witness was asked to take a polygraph examination, which he passed. Many UFO enthusiasts remained skeptical of the claims and denounced this testimony as no more than a fabrication. Unless otherwise noted, two sources of testimony attributed to the witness have been used in this examination. Interviews used to prepare the video Recollections of Roswell Part 2 by the Fund for UFO Research, see Appendix C, and Crash at Corona by Don Berliner and Stanton Friedman. Passages from this book were used only when exact quotations of the witness were indicated. Gerald Anderson. I thought they were plastic dolls. I didn't think they were real. Anderson related that as a 5-year-old boy on an outing with his family in west central New Mexico, they stumbled upon the crash of some type of aerial vehicle. When he first saw the craft, he thought it was a blimp. According to Anderson, he didn't really get very close, but thought he saw 4 bandaged crew members, and at first he thought they were plastic dolls. He also described attempts by persons in his party to communicate with one of the crew members. Soon after, other civilians arrived, some wearing pith helmets, followed by military personnel in an assortment of vehicles and aircraft commanded by a red-headed captain. The military personnel, after screaming and hollering at the civilians, "This is a military secret," started a recovery operation of the alien craft and crew. Anderson also recalled that the military personnel threatened some of the civilians with imprisonment or death before escorting them out of the area. Assessment. Anderson's choice of the terms blimp to describe the crash vehicle and dolls to describe the crew strongly suggests that a balloon with an anthropomorphic dummy payload was the foundation for this testimony. He also provided an abundance of supporting details that accurately described vehicles, aircraft, equipment, and procedures used by the Holloman Air Force Balloon Branch to launch and recover anthropomorphic dummies. An aspect of this testimony that is not accurate is the alleged threats and intimidation of civilians by military personnel. The use of such heavy-handedness was not a tactic used by the Air Force. A careful review of official records and interviews with numerous persons who actively participated in and were responsible for the conduct of Air Force members on high-altitude balloon recovery operations revealed that these allegations are untrue. Additionally, the witness alleges that the military personnel were screaming and hollering, "This is a military secret." This statement might lead uninitiated persons to believe that the witness observed something highly classified and that by telling everyone present that it was a military secret would somehow help it to remain so. However, logic dictates that if something was classified, screaming and hollering it was a secret would compromise it and not serve to protect its classification. This application of logic, combined with the fact that the launch and recovery of anthropomorphic dummies was unclassified, widely publicized, and often observed by local civilians, indicates that the witness's recollections are in error. There was never a reason to disrespect, scream, holler, or forbid any person from talking about the launch or recovery of anthropomorphic dummies. The crew members. The statement "I thought they were plastic dolls" seems an odd choice of words to describe an extraterrestrial being and is a likely reference to an anthropomorphic dummy whose skin was made of plastic. This description is similar to that of the sole witness of the other crash site north of Roswell who described the aliens as dummies. Other references provided by this witness further indicate that anthropomorphic dummies were the basis for these descriptions. The heads of the crew members were described as completely bald, with no visible ears, just a rise and then a hole. This is an accurate description of Alderson Research Laboratories model dummies that did not have hair and had either plastic ears molded to the head or a circular opening where a demountable ear or additional instrumentation was attached. See Figure 22. The statement "they didn't have a little finger," a detail very similar to one provided by another witness, also appears to be a description of dummies manufactured by Alderson Laboratories that were often damaged during the balloon tests, resulting in the loss of fingers. The assertion that they were all wearing one-piece suits, a shiny silverish gray color, trimmed in maroon-like cording, is a likely reference to a standard issue gray Air Force flight suit used to outfit the dummies, and red duct-type tape used in the tests that prevented air from filling the flight suit. See Figure 30. The recollection that crew members had bandages on their bodies were likely references to tape and nylon webbing used to prevent flailing of a dummy's arms and legs during tests. A reference to a bandage around his, the crew member's, midsection and partially over his shoulder is a likely reference to the standard B4 or B5 parachute with chest and shoulder straps worn by the dummies. The craft. In what appears to be a clear reference to a balloon was that when he saw the crashed vehicle, he thought it was a blimp. Additional descriptions of cables that went from one kind of a package of components to another kind of package in a metal box were likely references to the balloon control package that was positioned on top of to a balloon payload is the statement that on a hot New Mexico day the crashed vehicle was ice cold. It felt like it just came out of the freezer. This accurately describes a physical condition known as cold soaking, common to high-altitude payloads that had recently been exposed to sub-zero temperatures of the upper atmosphere. Military aircraft. The witness also described 2 aircraft of the same type used for anthropomorphic dummy recoveries as having been involved in the activity he witnessed. One aircraft was described as a C-47 and another as an observation aircraft, a high-winged aircraft. These were a C-47 and an L-20 aircraft used extensively by the balloon branch during the mid-1950s for tracking and recovering anthropomorphic dummy balloon flights. This testimony also described aircraft that were typically overhead during a recovery and an established procedure of landing on a rural road or in a field to reach isolated balloon launch or recovery locations. Military vehicles. Numerous military vehicles, several of which were described by other witnesses as having been at the other crash site north of Roswell, were also described. Witnesses at the 2 different sites described a wrecker and a 6x6, both of the type used for anthropomorphic dummy recoveries. The account also described 2 vehicles unique to the balloon branch that were used for the majority of high-altitude balloon recoveries during the mid to late 1950s. The witness described a Jeep-like truck that had a bunch of radios in it. There was a guy sitting in there wearing earphones and he was talking on the radio. This is a likely description of a Dodge M37 3/4 ton utility truck, known as a weapons carrier, that had been specially modified to carry radio equipment for balloon recovery operations. The Holloman Air Force Base balloon branch modified these vehicles in 1953, ruling out the possibility that the witness observed them in 1947, when such vehicles were not available to organizations performing balloon operations. The other vehicle described and used by the balloon branch were military ambulances. During the mid-1950s, the balloon branch modified 3 M43 3/4 ton ambulances for use as balloon recovery and communications vehicles. These vehicles were used for anthropomorphic dummy launch and recovery missions to relay messages to circling recovery aircraft and the Balloon Operations Center at Holloman Air Force Base. The witnesses also described a trailer with a motor on it like a generator. This is a likely description of a 1.5 ton cargo trailer with an MB-19 15 kilowatt diesel generator. These generators were used primarily on balloon launch sites during the 1950s and 1960s. See Figure 71. Balloon branch procedures. Descriptions of military personnel stretching stuff out on the ground, dragging stuff out of trucks is a likely description of a balloon launch procedure that required the fragile polyethylene balloon and its protective ground cloth to be removed from a launch vehicle and laid out on the ground prior to inflation. Another procedure described by the witness was an apparent reference to a balloon recovery practice of recording the names of the civilians who observed high-altitude balloon recoveries. The witness stated that military personnel took everybody's name and everything, which was a procedure to ensure payment of a $25 reward to persons who assisted in the recovery. This procedure was also necessary to settle future claims of property damage caused by the balloon, payload, or recovery vehicle.